Hi, I'm Mr. Faulkner,
I'm Miss Meeks.
and we're going to be doing chapter 16, which is subjects, verbs, verbal phrases, and things, and talking about the descriptive paragraph. So, of course, chapter 16 is coming from this book for English 1010. And this is the first of our little video series for it. So, I'll go ahead and talk about the descriptive paragraph part, and I'll let Miss Meeks talk more about the grammar, that material type of thing.
Perfect.
So, first of all, the first assignment is the descriptive paragraph. So our goal with description, as you guessed, is to describe something like with details. And usually this is going to try to appeal to the five senses, which are sight, what does something look like? Sound, smell, taste, and touch. Now, you should pick something that's important to you because it's just gonna, if I ask you to write a paragraph about a table, you're gonna be like, it's boring. I'm not interested in doing this assignment. Whereas if you pick something that you really like or enjoy, for example, my car, then I'm gonna love, well, relatively speaking, love that paragraph. It's gonna interest me, and it's something that I'll be passionate about talking about. Now, I'll tell you right now, often not all five of these will apply to your topic. I'm not going to tell you what my car tastes like. And I've had students type their paragraphs about their like watch or whatever. Yeah, don't worry about what your watch tastes like. You don't need to just to find out like, oh well, I have to hit all five of these senses. Usually, you'll do a lot of sight. You'll do a lot of like touch. Sound is a common one, and then these are going to apply more to like foods, right? Now, what you might do, and I know what Ms. Meeks talks about doing a lot, is like the peripher, right? Because you'll have room to talk about all five of these senses. What kind of food is there? What is it? What's the atmosphere smell like? What are some of the sights and sounds there? And like, is it warm outside? Right? So the paragraph assignments are going to be, in terms of length, 7 to 12 sentences. Now, that might sound like a lot at first, but we're going to go ahead and break that down a little bit. So our paragraph is always going to start with the topic sentence. The topic sentence being usually the first sentence of your paragraph, which explains what the paragraph is going to be about. It introduces your topic. So one thing we want to avoid with that is having a topic sentence that's too broad. And I'm going to make sure that the whole screen is in view. So a broad topic sentence, again, what we want to avoid is a sentence that doesn't like specify really what we're getting at. It could go a wide variety of directions. So this example that I've written on the board is, throughout human history, sports have affected cultures across the world. Okay, throughout human history, that narrows it down to a few million years, right? Sports, you're talking baseball, football, basketball, hockey, soccer, tennis, golf, affected cultures across the world. I didn't even pick a hemisphere. United States, China, Indonesia, Bolivia. What are we talking? So you see how this could go in so many different ways. I could talk about basketball in America. I could talk about soccer in Kenya. It doesn't narrow down anything at all, right? So the opposite problem would be if your topic sentence is too narrow. Usually these are just like statements of fact that aren't really worth expanding on. For example, Frederick's house was built in 1985. It's like, okay, like that's cool, fun, like congrats, but there's no real point in expanding on that, right? Or I can give you more details about the house, but they won't further develop this point. A third thing that we want to avoid would be an announcement. And these are pretty easy to spot. They'll usually start with something like this. This paragraph is going to explain the differences between cats and dogs. Or in this paper, I'm going to talk about blah, blah, blah. We're just going to, I guess, ignore this like concept that we're writing an essay, and we're just going to go ahead and jump right into it. the major differences between cats and dogs are their behavior and their size and whatever else. You see how we get right into that instead of addressing, I'm writing an essay. So now we might think about our descriptive paragraph and how we can introduce that. I mentioned the example of my car. It's my one true love in this world. So let's write about my car. So in this topic sentence, I bought my car a few years ago and there were several traits that made me fall in love with it. So one thing we might do here is specify which traits there were, right? But I trust that in this paragraph, I'm going to get more into that. The point of this topic sentence is you know exactly what object I'm going to be describing, right? My car. And if you'd rather talk about a person, you're free to do that. I've had people write about their spouses, usually positively.
Or your babies.
Or their babies. About my car. So we're talking about my car, and not just that it was bought a few years ago, but these several traits about it that I love, right? So we know that that's the direction that this paragraph is headed. Now, to get into outlining, which I feel like always helps me with my paragraphs or essays, I said that there were several traits that I love about my car. So I'm going to start brainstorming, what are these traits? What do I love about my car? Well, first of all, the exterior design. In other words, what it looks like from the outside. You see my car in the parking lot, what does it look like? I can also describe the interior design, right? The seats, the dashboard, etc. Now, in this economy, you got to be efficient, right? So let's talk about fuel economy, or miles to the gallon if you prefer. And I like to play my music at a reasonable volume, which means I appreciate a good sound system. Right? Now, if we're going back to the 5 senses, I've addressed what it looks like, so sight. With the interior design, I can talk about touch, how soft the seats are and everything. And fuel economy isn't really going to build onto those 5 senses, but it's still a good supporting detail. And then the sound system obviously is sound. I've hit on 3 of the 5 senses, and I've got 4 supporting points, right? Now, I think it's easier to break down the paragraph length requirement like this. We said 7 to 12 sentences earlier, right? So we have our one topic sentence. If I can write 2 sentences for each of these 4 supporting points, and if it's something you love, like I said earlier, instead of writing about a table, write about a person you care about, or in my case, my car, then you'll be able to come up with 3 or 4 things that you really like about that person or thing. Okay, so 2 sentences for each of these points. Now I'm up to 9 sentences, right? So I'm at the length requirement, but don't stop there. there's one more thing we need, and that's the conclusion paragraph. The conclusion sentence. And the job of the conclusion sentence is to remind your reader, give that reader a general overview of what you just talked about. So between my collar's interior and exterior appearance, efficiency, going back to that fuel economy, and sound system is definitely a car worth loving, falling hopelessly and irretrievably in love with. So you see how in this sentence, I reminded my reader, oh yes, these were my 4 supporting points. And I'm reiterating how much I love my car. That was the whole point of this paragraph. If you're counting along at home, that's 10 sentences. So right in that 7 to 12 range. And how would you feel about this paragraph? I mean, I didn't give you 8 full sentences for those supporting details, but I gave you a full topic sentence, a full conclusion sentence, and then you know that you're going to get 2 sentences for each of these. How do you
think
feel?
it's great. Every time I look at a paragraph, we grade first on topic sentence. Do you give us the topic and give us direction? So if you give me a good topic sentence and you support that topic sentence and then give us a conclusion, I'm thinking that's pretty much an A paper. There are grammatical issues that we're about to dive into, but overall, I would say that's a great paper.
Perfect. And when she says grammatical issues, she means in terms of we'll talk about grammar next, not tearing into what I wrote.
Of course not, and what you wrote.
So again, description, and if you're following along in the textbook at home, is chapter 3, and it goes into the act of describing something, asking specific questions. For example, I mentioned my car, but one of the questions that it asks is what type. So instead of car, I might talk about my Dodge Viper. So.
One thing I will add to that is sometimes what I find students tend to do is if the topic sentence, as he wrote about, is his car, nowhere in that paragraph is he going to talk about his best friend's car and how my best friend has better fuel economy than I do, because that would not support the topic sentence that clearly stated, I'm going to talk about my car. So just be sure that you're staying on topic and you don't chase rabbits, as I have seen some do. Perfect. All right, so next we want to talk about chapter 16. And chapter 16 really digs into subjects, verbs, and a little bit of phrases. But you will see when you look, what page is that?
It starts on 374.
374. One thing that you'll see in your course is we have chapter worksheets built in for every chapter. We also have chapter notes, I think, on everything except chapter 21. And simply that's because the book does a great job of chapter 21. So anytime you think you need a little extra help, please go to your chapter notes up under lessons. And chapter 16 specifically has a lot more than what your book has on your verbal phrases. So as with anything else, if you ever have questions that we don't address in a video recording, or that we don't address when we, send out messages or things like that, please don't hesitate to call and ask. So chapter 16, anytime you want to deal with a subject, Most often, this is one of those things that we know because we've learned it early on and we don't get away from that, but sometimes trying to break down what the subject of a sentence is can be kind of difficult. But anytime you're looking for a subject, it is always going to be a noun or a pronoun. There is can you find the pronoun, the indefinite pronoun box, the info box? I can't remember what page it is that we can direct. But let's look at a noun first. And we've learned this from grade school up. A noun is always, a person, place, thing. And I find most people know that, person, place, thing, because we've learned it forever. But we're going to add to it a little bit and add idea or activity. So somewhere along the way, I think activity got added, but I always was taught person, place, thing. Okay. So when we're dealing with a person, and if there is a person's first and last name, like Joe Smith, you would always obviously pick the first and the last name.
Is this the one that you're looking for?
Yes. What page is that?
486.
Okay, I'm going to put that up here. Thank you. Okay, so place, I typically tend to tell my students place can be going to school today, or place can be specific, like in New York City. Thing, because I'm sitting here looking at tables and chairs, we'll say table. Idea, ideas are very abstract, and if you think about a 12-year-old who might come home one day and tell his daddy, "Daddy, I am so in love." Well, daddy's going to look at 12-year-old like, "You've lost your mind." But the 12-year-old has an idea of this thing called love. It's different than our ideas, and our ideas are different than our parents and our grandparents. So everybody has a different idea, but when you think about things like love, faith even, everybody really has a different idea. So it's not like something you can put your finger on, but it's very abstract. And then activity will not make sense yet, but it will later. So I'm going to give the example of running. And most often when we think of running, we think verbs. And it is a verb, which is why this is confusing initially. We will make it clear. Okay. So Mr. Faulkner looked and found our pronoun page, which is page 486 in your text. So if there is a time where you're looking for a subject and it just doesn't appear that one jumps out at you, check page 486 because that gives you a listing of the indefinite pronouns. So afraid I'm going to trip over this cord. Okay, so personal pronouns you will see very often, and those are always I, you, he, she, it is a very general term. And often I don't know how Mr. Faulkner is, but usually when I see it on a paper, I usually circle it and go, what's it? We use it for so many things. So just make sure if you use it, I would use it very sparingly, and I would make very sure we know what it is that you're referring to. So then we've got we, and we have they. Also, a pronoun you will see sometimes here is going to be who. So personal pronouns. So the first test is really going to ask you to identify nouns or subjects and verbs, okay? So all of these, because anytime you have a subject, it is going to be a noun or a pronoun, okay? One thing, when we look at subjects, one thing that cannot, or two things that cannot be subjects, are the words here and there. And I think when I was in school, I was usually taught that your subject comes before the verb, which is sometimes true, probably often true, but not always true. Your subject can be anywhere in your sentence. So just simply because these two words come before the verb, sometimes a lot of people will sometimes circle them as subjects, but just know that these words are adverbs. And I'm going to put can never be subjects. Another thing you might want to think about here is sometimes your subject will be what we call the understood you. And this never happened to me growing up, but I'm going to use me as an example. If I had ever gotten in trouble growing up, when I got home, I'm quite sure that my mama would have said, go to your room. But she would not have had to call me by name. I would have understood, you go to your room. So sometimes, and I've never really understood this, but if it is a polite command, and I'm not sure how a command can be polite, but I guess it can, but that's the rule. A polite command or request, then it can be the understood you. Like, pick up the clothes. I don't have to say anybody's name, but it's understood that you pick up the clothes. So sometimes if you see a sentence, sometimes students in class, they'll say, oh, that's the understood you. And I'm like, no, it can't be. Unless it's a command or a request, you can't just put you on any sentence. It would have to be one of these two. Another thing you want to pay attention to, if you can find it, are your prepositions. There's a reason we want you to be familiar with prepositions.
And the prepositions will be on page 378 in an info box that looks like this.
Thank you. So you want to start basically dissecting your sentences, beginning with prepositional phrases. And a phrase begins with a preposition and ends with a noun or pronoun. And most often what I find is students know how to identify a preposition, but they don't know where to stop it. So knowing where to stop it is as important as knowing where it begins. And I had he was an older student in class one time that he was quite entertaining to have in class. But he told me one day that his third grade teacher told him that a preposition was anything that a squirrel could do to a tree. And I laughed at him. I was like, what? But then I really started thinking about it, and it really makes sense. But it doesn't fit every preposition, but especially if you're on a test and you're like, oh, is this a preposition? Think about that, because a squirrel can go around the tree. He can go in the tree. He can go to the tree. He can sit by the tree. He can go under it, over it, beside it, between the trees, among the trees, toward the tree. So just think about that, okay? It may help you. Like I said, it doesn't fit every preposition, but it really does help. All right. Now, this is why this is important. I'll give you an example here. Okay. So I always teach my students to first pick out the verb in the sentence, and we're about to get to verbs. But I always like for them to underline the verb and circle the subjects. That way they know the difference. But before we even look at the verb, let me back up. I always tell them, find the prepositional phrase first and then go to the verb. But that squirrel can go in the tree. So I always want to put a parenthesis around my prepositional phrases. So if it begins with the preposition, this is kind of nothing as an article. You won't stop until you get to your next noun or pronoun, usually a noun. So here's my noun. That's where I'm stopping. So the beauty of this is once you mark your prepositional phrase, whatever noun is sitting in that prepositional phrase, or if it's a pronoun, it will never be the subject of your sentence. And I think that's in there on some page. Page 378 as well will tell you that in bold print. So sometimes a sentence might not have a prepositional phrase, but often you will at least have one or two. Some sentences will have 4 or 5. So the beauty is I can mark all my phrases, and then I know we will probably be sending out the answers to the worksheets. So you'll see that we've marked them. But again, the beauty of it is if you've marked 4 or 5 prepositional phrases, whatever noun is sitting in here is not the subject of your sentence. So just note that, and then car is going to be my subject as is my noun. Did you had a...
Oh, no, you said it.
Okay, you just look like you wanted to say something. Okay. Also, at times you may have a compound subject. And that is just any subject, any nouns joined by and. So if we said Bob and Amy are going to town. So again, if I were marking this and trying to find the correct subject and verb, I would first mark my prepositional phrase, to being the preposition, town being the noun. My verb would be are going. And then I have a compound subject because I have 2 nouns joined by and. But I would not mark my subject ever this way, because and is a conjunction, so it's not a subject, so you would want to mark them individually. Okay. Okay. Is there anything I missed on the subject then?
On subjects, no.
Okay. So let's move forward to verbs. And usually when we look at verbs, action is going to be really easy to see. Most students have no trouble looking at action and determining that, hey, yes, there's my verb. Okay. But we also have helping verbs and we have linking verbs. There are others, but this is what we're going to deal with today. And I like to tell my students about these, okay? There's a certain verb and we call them the to be verbs, okay? That's their name. But when we look at function, that's where you've got helping or you've got linking, okay? The to be verbs though are am, is, are, was, were. We use them a lot, but I would say, and probably Mr. Faulknor would agree with me on this, try to stay away from these words in your writing, your paragraph writing as much as possible, because they don't make for very forceful, dynamic writing. They're kind of like, I'm here. They're very blah most of the time, but you will see them. They are used a lot, okay? So let's look at, I'm trying to look at what you can see on the board. All right, let's say Sam is running in the race. So what I would do, again, I would mark my prepositional phrase. Anytime you see is, it's always a verb. Never question that. Always a verb. If that verb is followed by action, you'll include that action to give you the complete verb, which is considered the verb phrase. So here is used as a helping verb, and we would call running as the main verb. So the whole thing is your verb, okay? And who's running? Sam is. So often if you get your verb, it's really easy then to determine the subject. But let me give you this one.
Because the subject is always going to be the person or thing in the sentence that's doing that verb. Every verb that you find needs at least one subject to be doing that verb.
Again, we've got is our verb. But notice the difference. This is followed by action. This is followed by description. And this descriptive word is simply an adjective. Okay. So is the only verb we have here. So this is considered a linking verb. And think about what it's doing. All it's doing is linking my subject to what I'm saying about it. And that's its function, is to just link the two together. Okay. So there are, your book calls them modals, but there are a lot of other helping verbs that we want to look at. And one thing that I try to tell my students is think about the train, the little choo-choo train. I think I can. But when people say, you know, can you do this? Well, let's look at do. I can do that. Like the train, I think I can. Okay, I really should do that. I might do that. I may do that. I could do it. I will do it. Okay, so you see that you've got a lot of helping verbs that help out do there. So you want to pay attention in your book to those. Like I said, your book calls them modals, but you want to look at those helping verbs and see what some of them can be.
And those helping verbs and modals are on page 375 of your book.
Thank you. All right. Another thing we need to look at here, though, is if you look at that page, you're going to see the verb can as a helping verb. But I want us to look at this. Okay. So obviously run is showing an action for us. Again, if I'm looking at my helping verbs, I'm going to see can. But notice what I'm not underlining is not. Okay? So when you look at not is not a verb. Never is never a verb. So sometimes in class when I'm going over things, students will say, cannot. I'm like, no, not is not a verb. So that's just one thing you might want to show yourself. No, not is not a verb. Never is never a verb. And there's a section.
Oh, I misread that. I thought you were trying to say that it's an adverb.
No, never a verb.
But it is an adverb.
It is, but look at, there's also a section in your book that says words that cannot be verbs. And the reason they can't be verbs is because they are adverbs. But look at that section in your book so you'll know what not to underline. And even if I had written it as can't run, the N apostrophe T is still the not part of it, but can is your actual helping verb. So you just would not include the apostrophe T.
And what you're talking about, words often confused as verbs, is the headline that's on pages 382 and 383. So you have words that cannot be verbs, recognizing main verbs, and verb forms that cannot be main verbs. Those three sections on those 2 pages are what Ms. Meeks is talking about right now.
Okay. All right. Anything else we need to add to the verbs?
Yes. So you see how we how we labeled can and run as the 2 verbs or 2 parts of the verb in this sentence. the other thing that might come up on worksheets or on the test, questions.
Please.
No, we don't say please, we just do. So in labeling this sentence real quick, our first step, like you said earlier, prepositional phrase, right? We know that our subject and our verb will not be, right? Now, looking at verbs, which is usually what I like to find next, because we know our subject is going to be the one doing that verb. Help, right? Well, just like on this slide when we included the helping verb and the main verb or the action verb, we're going to do the same thing here. Note, even though it's separated by this you, we're still going to have helping verb, main verb, or action verb, if you prefer. So both halves of our verb are can and help. Now, we have our verb, and now I always ask, okay, we have our verb, who's doing that, or what's doing that? Who can help? Now we have you and me on both sides, but no, the one that's being asked to help is you. So that would be our subject. Okay.
And like also here, we would never say me can help.
Yes.
Unless you're a 3-year-old child. So just keep that in mind when you're looking for subjects.
Which goes back to the when you had the personal pronouns towards the beginning, and it was like I, he, she. Those are the types of subjects or pronouns that can be subjects for them. Now, I see another verb in this sentence. Right? Carry. That's an action. And I just want to point that out because sometimes we'll give you questions or sentences that have multiple verbs and multiple subjects. So we have this action verb here. Just blanked on what I was writing, or main verb, whichever. And I'm cool stopping here because we're still talking about you doing this action. So just because we found another verb doesn't mean we have to suddenly find another subject. An easy example of this is I run and swim on Tuesdays. I have one subject, I, but I had two verbs, run, swim. So it's not one of those things that you have to balance out and have the exact same number on both sides. But I just wanted to bring up the actual question so you can see that sometimes our verbs will get split up like this, and that's okay.
And often with that, your subject does sit right in the middle of that helping verb and that main verb. Okay. One more thing and we'll be finished. Let's move forward to the verbals. And please note that this is a title. Students often get confused at looking at the types of verbals and then looking at the verbals, because often on a test we will ask you to identify specifically which verbal it is that you're dealing with. But notice the root here is verb. They look like verbs, but they're not verbs, which is why we try to go ahead and bring them up in the first session, because you will see them throughout the semester, and we will always refer back to, remember in chapter 16, okay? So the first type of verbal that we have is a gerund.
And gerunds can be found on page 383 as well.
Okay, page 383. All right. And what they are is they are verb-like words ending in ing that act as nouns. And the simple fact that they act as nouns mean they can be subjects. Subjects are nouns. So They're not always subjects, but they can be, okay? So what we typically look at in this first section, most of them are going to be subjects, but just know they can function as other things as well. All right, so going back to noun, person, place, thing, idea, activity, okay? So this is really going to be your activity, all right? So let's say running, and this is a lie, and Mr. Faulkner will know it's a lie, but that's okay. I'm using it as an example. So running is my favorite hobby. Okay. So we know, because I've already told you, is always a verb. You don't have to question that. When you see is, think verb. So if that's the verb of my sentence, I want to ask myself now, like, well, what's my favorite hobby? Running. Okay. Verb like word, ending in ing, and it's sitting here acting like a noun. It's the subject of my sentence. Okay. So that is my gerund. All right, now let me add to it a little bit. Running in the park is so just like prepositional phrases begin with a preposition and they end with a noun or a pronoun, your verbal phrases actually start with the actual verbal, and then you're going to have just a few little words added to it. So here, running is still my gerund, but my gerund phrase is running in the park. It runs right to my verb and it stops. So notice with this, so in the park is typically a prepositional phrase. So what you've got to know is that these prepositional phrases get overtaken by these actual verbals because the verbals are so much stronger. And the verbals really say, move out of my way, you are not important. So they get overtaken. So just know the difference, like gerund versus gerund phrase. Because on the first test, you're going to be asked to identify the phrase. Okay.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
Well, actually. So in both of these examples, running is my favorite hobby, running in the park is my favorite hobby. We see our gerund at the very beginning of the sentence, and we see them as subjects in both of these. Note that we can be subjects. I'll also lie. I like running in the park. No, I don't.
Storyteller.
Now, if you'll notice, running in the park, same gerund, right, as we just had. Let's find our verb. Like. Who likes in this sentence?
I do.
I, right? So I. So I is our subject. Like is still our verb. This is still a gerund, but notice that in this situation, it's not acting as a subject. So just note that it doesn't have to be a subject every time. What we're looking for is that ing treated like a noun. In this case, an object.
All right. Our second verbal, to me, is probably the easiest one to see. It is the infinitive.
Which is also on page 383.
Perfect. Okay. An infinitive is simply to plus a verb. Okay. So, also a lie about Mr. Faulkner because he doesn't want to get a new car, but all right, same thing if we were doing this. Wants is our verb. Who wants it? He does. And notice how we've got to plus a verb because get is usually a verb. So to plus your verb is your actual infinitive. Put INF there because that's your infinitive. But the infinitive phrase, I like to tell my students, complete the thought. To get what? A new car. So this whole thing, to get a new car, is your infinitive phrase. Now, to is a preposition. The squirrel can go to the tree. So I don't want you to get the two confused. He went to town. And this is the difference. To is going to be in both. Okay? It's common to both. But if to is followed by a noun, it truly is nothing but a prepositional phrase. But if to is connected to a verb, that's your infinitive phrase.
Yeah, and I always just say we can look at the very next word next to it, because we could say he went to the town. The next word is not a verb, therefore it's a preposition. So if you see to, that's a great trigger, right? Oh, there it is. It's either a preposition or an infinitive. This very next word is going to tell you which one it is.
So that one's the easy one. And one more. 3 is our participial phrase. We will see this much later in the semester, but this one also, we would say a verb-like word ending, and this is where the confusion can come in. It ends in ing or ed and acts as an adjective. So therein lies the difference. The gerund acts like a noun, so it can be a subject. This one simply is going to be descriptive. Let's see. So if we look at this sentence, needed is going to be our verb. Who needed? Baby needed. Okay. So baby is our subject, but when we describe that baby, notice that we have a verb-like word ending in ing, but this is acting like an adjective because it's telling us what kind of baby we got. Okay. So that is, one thing that we'll look at is if your sentence starts with a gerund, it will not be set off with a comma. Most phrases that begin your sentence will be set off with a comma, but gerund phrases will not. So the difference between a gerund phrase at the beginning of a sentence and a participial phrase at the beginning of a sentence is that participial phrase will be set off by a comma. And this is one that's actually on the worksheet. Something like this. This is not the sentence, but you'll get the picture. So, I always tell my students, look at the first word in the sentence. If it is an ing word, pay attention to it. It's either a gerund or it's a participial phrase. So notice it is an ing word, but also notice it is set off by a comma. Here's my subject. Here's my verb. Okay. So this one also has an infinitive here. Most of your sentences on the test, at least, are going to have only one per sentence, but just to show that it can have two different types of phrases per sentence. Okay. But again, if your ing, the first word, if that phrase is set off with a comma, that's going to be your participial phrase, and and not the J. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I'll give 2 examples without commas, I guess. And I'm basically going to make these the same type of sentence, but we'll do a ED verb as well. So in both of these, we have the dog chasing the car is mine, and the car covered in dust is mine. No, it's not. I always get one. But we see a verb that ends in ed here, and a verb that ends in ing here. We'll go with the related words as well. See how these in both sentences are just giving extra information about the subject, right? The dog or the car. And one thing I like to tell my students that helps them with participles is they're just giving extra information. It's what adjectives do. So what I can do with participles that I can't do with gerunds or infinitives is, check this out. Go away. The dog is mine. It's still a complete sentence. It has a little less information, but the thought is still conveyed. That dog is mine. The car is mine. So if we can just chop it right out and the sentence still makes sense, it's probably a participle because it was just doing a little extra. It wasn't vital to that sentence.
Very good. So we hope this has been helpful for you. But again, if you ever have questions or if something doesn't make sense or you just need further clarification, please don't hesitate to call us or come by and see us. We're in the Gen Ed building on the South Campus. So we usually know where the other is when it's during the work day. So if you need one or both, just let us know and we'll be glad to help you.
Yeah, as always, just let us know if you have any questions, whether that's coming by our office or giving us a call on our office phone or sending us an email. We'll get back to you as soon as we can, assuming it's not in person, in which case we'll help you right away. So hope you've enjoyed this video.